Chapter 16. Angels. Hordes upon hordes of them. Beings massed like the clouds of souls, or the commingling whiffs of spirituality, or the exaltations of souls that Dore pictured so often. It may be that the Milky Way is a composition of stiff, frozen, finally static, absolute angels. We shall have data of little Milky Ways moving swiftly, or data of hosts of angels, not absolute or still dynamic. I suspect myself that the fixed stars are really fixed and that the minute motions said to have been detected in them are illusions. I think that the fixed stars are absolutes. Their twinkling is only the interpretation by an intermediate state of them. Think that soon after Leverrier died, a new fixed star was discovered. That, if Dr. Gray had struck to his story of the thousands of fishes from one pail of water, had written upon it, lectured upon it, taken to the street corners to convince the world that, whether conceivable or not, his explanation was the only true explanation, had thought of nothing but this last thing at night and first thing in the morning, his obituary, another nova reported in monthly notices. I think the Milky Ways of an inferior or dynamic order have often been seen by astronomers. Of course, it may be that the phenomena that we shall now consider are not angels at all. We are simply feeling around trying to find out what we can accept. Some of our data indicate hosts of rotund and complacent tourists in interplanetary space, but then the data of long, lean, hungry ones. I think that there are out in interplanetary planetary space super Tamerlanes at the head of hosts of celestial ravagers, which have come here and pounced upon civilizations of the past, cleaning them up, all but their bones, or temples and monuments for which later historians have invented exclusionist histories. But if something now has a legal right to us, it can enforce its proprietorship. They've been warned off. It's the way of all exploitation. I should say that we're now under cultivation, that we're conscious of it, but have the impertinence to attribute it all to our own nobler and higher instincts. Against these notions is the same sense of finality that opposes all advance. It's why we rate acceptance as a better adaptation than belief. Opposing us is the strong belief that, as to interplanetary phenomena, virtually everything has been found out. Sense of finality and illusion of homogeneity. But that what is called advancing knowledge is violation of the sense of blankness. A drop of water. Once upon a time, water was considered so homogeneous that it was thought of as an element. The microscope, and not only that, the superstitiously elementary was seen to be of infinite diversity, but that in its protoplasmic life there were new orders of beings. Or in the year 1491, and a European looking westward over ocean, his feelings that suave western droop was unbreakable, that gods of regularity would not permit that smooth horizon to be disturbed by coasts or spotted with islands. The unpleasantness of even contemplating such a state, wide, smooth west so clean against the sky, spotted with islands, geographic leprosy. But coasts and islands and Indians and bison in the seemingly vacant west, lakes, mountains, rivers. One looks up at the sky, the relative homogeny of the relatively unexplored. One thinks of only a few kinds of phenomena. But the acceptance is forced upon me that there are modes and modes and modes of interplanetary existence, things as different from planets and comets and meteors as Indians are from bison and prairie dogs, a supergeography or celestiography of vast stagnant regions, but also of super Niagaras and ultra Mississippis, and a super sociology voyagers and tourists and ravagers, the hunted and the hunting, the super mercantile, the super piratic, the super evangelical. Sense of homogeny, or our positive illusion of the unknown, and the fate of all positivism, astronomy and the academic, ethics and the abstract, the universal attempt to formulate or to regularize, an attempt that can be made only by disregarding or denying, or all things disregarded or deny that which will eventually invade and destroy them, until comes the day when some one thing shall say and enforce upon infinitude, thus far shalt thou go, here is absolute demarcation, the final utterance. There is only I. In the monthly notices of the RAS 1148, there is a letter from the Reverend W. Reed that upon the 4th of September 1851 at 9:30 a.m. he had seen a host of self-luminous bodies passing the field of his telescope, some slowly and some rapidly. They appeared to occupy a zone several degrees in breadth. The direction of most of them was due east to west, but some moved from north to south. The numbers were tremendous. They were observed for 6 hours. Editor's note: may not these appearances be attributed to an abnormal state of the optic nerves of the observer? In the monthly notices 11-38, Mr. Reed answers that he had been a diligent observer with instruments of a superior order for about 28 years, but I have never witnessed such an appearance before. As to illusion, he says that 2 other members of his family had seen the objects. The editor withdraws his suggestion. We know what to expect almost absolutely. In an existence that is essentially Hibernarian, we can predict the past, that is, look over something of this kind written in 1851 and know what to expect from the exclusionists later. If Mr. Reed saw a migration of dissatisfied angels numbering millions, they must merge away, at least subjectively, with commonplace terrestrial phenomena. Of course, disregarding Mr. Reed's probable familiarity of 28 years' duration with the commonplaces of terrestrial phenomena. Monthly notices 12-183, letter from Reverend W.R. Dawes, that he had seen similar objects in the month of September, that they were nothing but seeds floating in the air. In the report of the British Association 1852-235, there is a communication from Mr. Reed to Professor Baden-Powell that the objects that had been seen by him and by Mr. Dawes were not similar. He denies that he had seen seeds floating in the air. There had been little wind, and that had come from the sea, where seeds would not be likely to have origin. The objects that he had seen were round and sharply defined, and with none of the feathery appearance of thistledown. He then quotes from a letter from C.B. Chalmers, F.R.A.S., who had seen a similar stream procession or migration, except that some of the bodies were more elongated, ortoline, and hungry than globular. He might have argued for 65 years. He'd have impressed nobody of importance. The supermotive or dominant of his era was exclusionism, and the notion of seeds in the air assimilates, with due disregards, with that dominant. Our pageantries here upon our earth, and things looking down upon us, and the crusades were only dust clouds, and glints of the sun or in shining armor were only particles of mica in dust clouds. I think it was a crusade that Reed saw, but that it was right relatively to the year 1851 to say that it was only seeds in the wind, whether the wind blew from the sea or not. I think of things that were luminous with religious zeal mixed up, like everything else, in intermediateness, with black marauders and from gray to brown beings of little personal ambitions. There may have been a Richard Coeur de Lion on his way to right wrongs in Jupiter. It's right, relatively to 1851, to say that he was a seed of cabbage. Professor Coffin, USN, that during the eclipse of August 1869, he had noted the passage across his telescope of several bright flakes resembling thistleblows floating in the sunlight. But the telescope was so focused that if these things were distinct, they must have been so far away from the earth that the difficulties of orthodoxy remain as great, one way or another, no matter what we think they were. They were well defined, says Professor Coffin. Henry Waldner, Nature 5-304. That April 27th, 1863, he had seen a great number of small shining bodies passing from west to east. He had notified Dr. Wolf of the Observatory of Zurich, who had convinced himself of the strange phenomenon. Dr. Wolf had told him that similar bodies had been seen by Sig Capocchi of the Capodimonte Observatory at Naples, May 11th, 1845. The shapes were of great diversity, or different aspects of similar shapes. Appendages were seen upon some of them. We are told that some were star-shaped with transparent appendages. I think myself it was a Mohammed and his Hegira. May have been only his harem. Astonishing sensation, afloat in space with 10 million wives around one. Anyway, it would seem that we have considerable advantage here, inasmuch as seeds are not in season in April, but the pulling back to earth, the bedraggling by those sincere but dull ones of some time ago. We have the same stupidity, necessary functioning stupidity of attribution of something that was so rare that an astronomer notes only one instance between 1845 and 1863 to an everyday occurrence, or Mr. Waldner's assimilative opinion that he had only seen ice crystals, whether they were not very exclusive veils of a super harem or planes of a very light material. We have an impression of star-shaped things with transparent appendages that have been seen in the sky. Hosts of small bodies, black this time, that were seen by the astronomers Herrick, Boisballet, and De Cuppis. Something. Scientific 1860-25. Vast numbers of bodies that were seen by M. Lamy to cross the moon. Another instance of dark ones. Prodigious number of dark spherical bodies reported by Messier, June 17, 1777. Considerable number of luminous bodies which appeared to move out from the sun in diverse directions, seen at Havana during eclipse of the sun, May 15, 1863, by Professor Auber Poey. And Poey cites a similar instance of August 3rd, 1886. M. Letard's opinion that they were birds. Large number of small bodies crossing disk of the sun, some swiftly, some slowly, most of them globular, but some seemingly triangular, and some of more complicated structure, seen by M. Trouvelot, who, whether seeds, insects, birds, or other commonplace things, had never seen anything resembling these forms. Report from the Rio de Janeiro Observatory of vast numbers of bodies crossing the sun, some of them luminous and some of them dark, from some time in December 1875 until January 22nd, 1876. Of course, at a distance, any form is likely to look round and roundish, but we point out that we have notes upon the seeming of more complex forms. In La Astronomie 1886-70 is recorded M. Breguier's observation at Marcellus, April 15th and April 25th, 1883, upon the crossing of the sun by bodies that were irregular in form. Some of them moved as if in alignment. Letter from Sir Robert Ingalls to Colonel Sabine. That at 3 p.m. August 8th, 1849, at Gaze, Switzerland, Inglis had seen thousands and thousands of brilliant white objects like snowflakes in a cloudless sky. Though this display lasted about 25 minutes, not one of these seeming snowflakes was seen to fall. Ingalls said that his servant fancied that he had seen something like wings on these, whatever they were. Upon page 18 of the report, Sir John Herschel says that in 1845 or 1846, his attention had been attracted by objects of considerable size in the air, seemingly not far away. He had looked at them through a telescope. He says that they were masses of hay, not less than a yard or two in diameter. Still, there are some circumstances that interest me. He says that, though no less than a whirlwind could have sustained these masses, the air about him was calm. No doubt, wind prevailed at the spot, but there was no roaring noise. None of these masses fell within his observation or knowledge. To walk a few fields away and find out more would seem not much to expect from a man of science, but it is one of our superstitions that such a seeming trifle is just what? By the spirit of an era, we'll call it one is not permitted to do. If those things were not masses of hay, and if Herschel had walked a little and found out and had reported that he had seen strange objects in the air, that report in 1846 would have been as misplaced as the appearance of a tail upon an embryo still in its Gestrula era. I have noticed this inhibition in our own case many times. Looking back, why didn't I do this or that little thing that would have cost so little and have meant so much? Didn't belong to that era of my own development. Nature 22-64. That at Kathmandu, Germany, about half an hour before sunrise, March 22nd, 1880, an enormous number of luminous bodies rose from the horizon and passed in a horizontal direction from east to west. They are described as having appeared in a zone or belt. They shone with a remarkably brilliant light. So they've thrown lassos over our data to bring them back to Earth, but they're lassos that cannot tighten. We can't pull out of them. We may step out of them or lift them off. Some of us used to have an impression of science sitting in calm, just judgment. Some of us now feel that a good many of our data have been lynched. If a crusade, perhaps from Mars to Jupiter, occur in the autumn, seeds. If a crusade or outpouring of celestial vandals is seen from this earth in the spring, ice crystals. If we have record of a race of aerial beings, perhaps with no substantial habitat, seen by someone in India, locusts. This will be disregarded. If locusts fly high, they freeze and fall in thousands. Nature 47-581. Locusts that were seen in the mountains of India at a height of 12,750 feet in swarms and dying by thousands. But no matter whether they fly high or fly low, no one ever wonders what's in the air when locusts are passing overhead because of the falling of stragglers. I have especially looked this material up. No mystery when locusts are flying overhead, constant falling of stragglers. Monthly notices 30-135. An unusual phenomenon noticed by Lieutenant Herschel October 17th and 18th, 1870, while observing the sun at Bangalore, India. Lieutenant Herschel had noticed dark shadows crossing the sun, but away from the sun there were luminous moving images. For 2 days, bodies passed in a continuous stream varying in size and velocity. The lieutenant tries to explain, as we shall see, but he says, as it was the continuous flight for 2 whole days in such numbers in the upper regions of the air of beasts that left no stragglers is a wonder of natural history, if not of astronomy. He tried different focus and he saw wings, perhaps he saw planes. He says that he saw upon the objects either wings or phantom-like appendages. Then he saw something that was so bizarre that in the fullness of his 19th centuryness, he writes, no longer doubt they were locusts or flies of some sort. One of them had paused. It had hovered. Then it had whisked off. The editor says that at the time, countless locusts had descended upon certain parts of India. We now have an instance that is extraordinary in several respects. Super voyagers or super ravagers, angels, ragamuffins, crusaders, immigrants, aeronauts, or aerial elephants, or bison, or dinosaurs, except that I think the thing had planes or wings. One of them has been photographed. It may be that in the history of photography, no more extraordinary picture than this has ever been taken. L'Astronomie 1885-347, that at the observatory of Zacatecas, Mexico, August 12, 1883, about 2,500 meters above sea level, were seen a large number of small luminous bodies entering upon the disk of the sun. M. Manila telegraphed to the observatories of the City of Mexico and of Puebla. Word came back that the bodies were not visible there. Because of this parallax, M. Manila placed the bodies relatively near the Earth. But when we find out what he called relatively near the Earth, birds or bugs or hosts of a super Tamerlane or army of celestial Richard Coeur de Lion, our heresies rejoice anyways. His estimate is less distant than the moon. It was quoted. One of them was photographed, C. L'Astronomie 1885-349. The photograph shows a long body surrounded by indefinite structures or by the haze of wings or planes in motion. L'Astronomie 1887-66. Senor Rico of the Observatory of Palermo writes that November 30th, 1880, at 8:30 o'clock in the morning, he was watching the sun when he saw, slowly traversing its disk, bodies in two long parallel lines and a shorter parallel line. The bodies looked winged to him, but so large were they that he had to think of large birds. He thought of cranes. He consulted ornithologists and learned that the configuration of parallel lines agrees with the flight formation of cranes. This was in 1880. Anybody now living in New York City, for instance, would tell him that also it is a familiar formation of airplanes. But because of data of focus and subtended angles, these beings or objects must have been high. Senor Rico argues that condors have been known to fly 3 or 4 miles high, and that heights reached by other birds have been estimated at 2 or 3 miles. He says that cranes have been known to fly so high that they have been lost to view. Our own acceptance in conventional terms is that there is not a bird of this earth that would not freeze to death at a height of more than 4 miles, that if condors fly 3 or 4 miles high, they are birds that are especially adapted to such altitudes. Senor Rico's estimate is that these objects or beings or cranes must have been at least 5.5 miles high.